I'll do a real short introduction. We're going to be talking about IUU fishing and traceability programs, and focusing on loss of American jobs. And we've got David Schorr here from World Wildlife Fund, one of our 4 advisory council partners with Conservation International, the Nature Conservancy, and Wildlife Conservation Society, which been with us from the beginning. So, David, if you'd like to come up here, and I know everybody's looking forward to your presentation, and then I'll introduce Mark Gleason. So, David.
Hi, everybody. Good day. Thank you very much, and thank you to ICCF and OCF for the delicious steak I just ate, and for having you all here today. It's a great opportunity to talk about something. So I'm going to give you what is pretty much a 101 sort of wrap on IUU fishing and traceability, not get too far into things. You know, I have to move myself forward a little bit because I need to see my own presentation, otherwise I don't know what I'm... Thank you. Okay. Yeah. No? Yeah, that's a good sign. So that's it. Try it again. So basically just walk through a little bit what is IUU fishing, why is it a problem, why do we care about it, a couple of the things that are going on about it, why these days and the next couple of years actually are going to be a really important time to pay attention to this issue. So let's just start with some wonky stuff. IUU, I don't know how many of you actually heard that before, but it's a phrase you'll hear a lot, so I figured I'd tell you what it stands for. It's a term of art. It means illegal, unreported, or unregulated fishing. And I think that we can blame the UN system for coming up with that. Illegal means, and this is basically under prevailing international law, that it violates somebody's law, right? It violates a national law, or it violates an international law. And you'll hear me say RFMO every once in a while. That's a regional fisheries management organization. That's basically the way, if you have international stocks and you have international cooperation, you set up a regional fisheries management organization. And IUU means fishing contrary to RFMO rules also. And it also means fishing on the high seas where there's no law at all if you're violating basic international law, like you're fishing without a flag. And you're sort of hiding from even customary international law. So that's illegal. Unreported means what it sounds like. That is that someplace there's an obligation to tell somebody you're fishing and you're not living up to that obligation. That's usually a national obligation, but again, it can be an RFMO obligation. It's, I guess, a subcategory of illegal, although in some ways you could have an obligation to report that maybe a lawyer would tell you wasn't quite as strong a legal obligation as some of the other things, so it's considered a separate category. Sorry about this. Doesn't seem to like me. Yeah, thanks. And unregulated means not subject to basic minimum regulations. And this could be a little bit controversial because I'm not sure if this is not functioning correctly or not. Thank you. No, can you go back one, please? This could be controversial because it means that you have to decide what a basic minimum regulation is, right? And not everybody agrees what you have to do to manage a fishery correctly. But somewhere in this idea of IUU is that if your fisheries management system is so bad that you're not meeting basic fisheries management obligations, maybe you would fall into the IUU category also. So most people tend to think of it mainly as illegal fishing, and we just call it pirate fishing sometimes, but there is this kind of wonky definition that becomes relevant when you start looking at particularly laws nationally and internationally. So IUU is a big problem, right? Let's get the dimensions of this straight. About 20% of the world's commercially caught fish are probably caught illegally. Now, obviously, it's very hard to know exactly what that number is, because if it's illegally caught and it's unreported, you don't know precisely. But there have been a bunch of scholars, and this is a number that's not much in dispute. About 20% of world catch, and I don't know if you can read the areas underneath there. You see some areas are much more plagued with IUU fishing than others. In some fisheries, you'll get up to 50%, and I'm talking about commercially significant fisheries, where maybe 50% of the fish that are being landed there are essentially being stolen. They're illegal. In terms of value, a rough estimate, $23 billion per year in product that is illegal. And this is in an industry where the total value of the industry is a little bit under $100 million. Right? So we're talking about a huge portion of a major food industry, wild-caught fish, that is essentially piracy. Why should we care? So IUU hurts America. It hurts us. It hurts all of us. Let's start with a couple of facts about how we eat fish here. 85% of our seafood is imported in this country. About half of that is from wild fisheries, and about half of that is from aquaculture. But we import lots of fish, and we eat lots of fish from abroad, and that means that the illegalities that are happening outside our borders have an impact on us, and we, in some sense, have an impact on it. Our import, if we take a rough percentage of total IUU fishing in the world and U.S. imports, you could estimate that maybe $1.3 billion a year of fish on the U.S. market are illegal, or illegally caught fish. What this means for us is a bunch of things. First, it means that our fishermen are competing, often on price, against folks who are not following the law. And very often the folks who are not following the law are able to cut their prices down. And you're going to hear a colleague of mine talk about that in some detail in a couple of minutes. So honest fishermen have to compete with pirates. U.S. consumers are buying pirate fish, and they don't really know it, and they're unwittingly participating in crime. And I'll talk about what that crime is in a second. It puts merchants at risk because increasingly people are asking the question, where's my fish coming from? You'll see that as a phenomenon around. People want to know, where's my fish coming from? And what's going to happen in the next couple of years is that people are going to begin to learn that a lot of the fish they're eating is illegal. And just as sustainability has become an issue with the consumer, I think that illegality is going to become an issue with the consumer as well. So we need to make sure that American dollars support American values, right? We need to make sure that honest workers are not being hurt by dishonest workers. We need to make sure that families, when they put meals on their table, can feel good about them. But more than that, we need to care about the other impacts of illegal fishing. Illegal fishing is a direct contributor to the overfishing crisis that's going on around the planet. Now, many of you may know already, we're already at a point where 85% of the world's commercial stocks are either overfished or right on the brink of being overfished. And that number has been steadily climbing every year. So we're going through an historic crisis of overfishing, and our supply of food and our profits from fishing are in real danger if we don't get this right. Food security and livelihoods. There are a lot of communities that depend on fish and fishing for whether they're processors or fishermen, and they're directly threatened by price competition here as well. I talked about crime before. We'll come out with a report, I hope, sometime this year, talking about human rights violations and actually human slavery on board illegal fish. Pirate fishing vessels are places where they're sweatshops on the sea, and a number of them actually have human slavery and human trafficking going on. Crime and stability, a lot of drug trade is through illegal fishing vessels. In fact, we have one problem in Africa where we're having problems trying to confront getting people to pay attention to the fish flows because they don't want to look too closely at the fish. Inside the fish are war diamonds coming out of some countries in Africa. So we try to say, hey, you need to count the fish because the fish stocks are declining, and people say, no, we can't do that. We're smuggling too many diamonds inside the fish. We like to point out the bombers who came into Mumbai a couple of years ago came in on fishing vessels. And port control, controlling who is coming into your ports, is an important thing. And in fact, fishing is one of the least regulated areas of how people approach sea coasts now. Okay, so it's a problem. It's a big problem for us competitively and in terms of food security and real security. What should we do? So this is a problem that's been around, it's been recognized for a couple of decades already. And in 1998, the FAO, UN, came forward with a plan of action to confront IUU fishing. I think that's when they managed to invent that lovely IUU word. And they told everybody how we should solve all the problems. And essentially, after that, not much happened. And I would say IUU fishing has not been significantly reduced up until the last couple of years. However, in the last several years, things have begun to change. And they've begun to change significantly with US and EU leadership. And what's new about what we're doing now compared to the UN speak of a decade or more ago is we're moving beyond the idea that the way you fight IUU fishing is just by putting cops on the water. It's actually pretty hard to get enough cops out on the water to stop IUU fishing, so you've got to do something else. And there are two basic things that people are starting to do. Number one is to focus on the basics of regulation, right? One of our problems is you don't even need to have a registered vessel to go fishing, right? If you want to ship a good on a merchant marine ship across the sea, you can be certain that you're going to ship it on a registered boat. And that's because you can't get insurance for your cargo if you don't. But fishing vessels don't have the same commercial need to be registered, and many, many of them are not registered. So you essentially don't even know who's fishing, and this is a basic problem. Secondly, port inspections. We have plenty of port inspections for tariff reasons or for commercial reasons, but very underdeveloped port inspection regime. So again, not what's out on the water, but what's happening on the land is a new focus. And in particular, blocking trade. And this is the focus that I think will be most important for many of you. We can't stop the fishing, but we can stop the selling. We can stop the selling a lot more easily than we can stop the fishing. And so blocking IUU trade is the sort of new wave. And this brings us down to three things that are going on. One, some amendments to U.S. high seas law in 2007, the EU doing some very interesting stuff in 2010, and now, right now, an EU-U.S. cooperative agreement to keep going. And I'm going to tell you very briefly about each of these things. So first, in 2007, we amended some of our high seas laws to give our government the right to go out and see where is piracy, fishing piracy taking place, where it is taking place, to enter into diplomatic conversations with foreign governments to try to solve the problem. And if we're not satisfied that those diplomatic conversations do solve the problem, the law now gives the U.S. the right to impose trade sanctions or other economic pain on foreign governments that aren't controlling IUU fishing. So that has been important, and it's been under implementation for a couple of years, and a number of countries have been found in violation of this. And if you ask NOAA, they will tell you that they are managing actually to stop some IUU fishing this way, mainly through the diplomatic process that I referred to a moment ago. More aggressive is what the EU has done, and this may be the wave of the future. The EU passed a rule that came into effect in 2010 that, first of all, set up very strict rules for what happens when boats reach their own shore. But more important, you cannot export a fish into the EU from anywhere on the planet today without a catch certificate from a vessel that the host government says this is a legal vessel. And so you cannot sell seafood into the EU now without a piece of paper that actually has the captain's name on it. And that piece of paper has to be vouched for by the exporting country that this was legal fishing. This has had an enormous impact on how business is really being done. And if you wander around, I was just at the Brussels Seafood Show last week. The number of exporters and fish businesses around the planet that are really worried, how do I get my fish into the EU? How do I demonstrate that my fish is really legal? This is changing behavior. Now, I'll say from WWF's perspective, right now we're not convinced that this system is really working. What's really happening is people are not able to get valid catch certificates, but they're still using catch certificates. So we have strong suspicions that this has been implemented too quickly, and there's no transparency in how the EU decides whose catch certificates to take and who's not, right? So there's a bit of a struggle here about is this system for real? And the EU, I think, is sincerely trying to do it. But if you try to peek under the lid and see what's really going on here right now, nobody can really tell. Which is one of the reasons why it's important that last September, the head of NOAA, Dr. Jane Lubchenco, and her counterpart, the head of the Fisheries Bureau in the EU, Maria Dominaki, signed an agreement basically to try to get the U.S. and the EU working together to stop IUU fishing. And the question is, are we going to be moving towards a more harmonized way of doing this? Are we going to be moving towards catch certificates? Are we going to be helping get catch certificates that are really effective but don't interfere too much with business? So where do we go from here? What are the tools that people are trying to use to stop IUU fishing? I want to talk about three things. One is the global record of fishing vessels. I mentioned before that right now there is no way of registering fishing vessels the way there is for registering commercial vessels. The United States, along with Europe, have been pushing very hard to have a global record of fishing vessels, and we're going to need U.S. leadership to make this happen. Most of our vessels are registered. It's the other folks who are competing with us that are not, that we need to make sure they get registered. This is going to be a matter of diplomacy, but also funding for a global record. Also important is something you'll hear a lot about called port state measures. And this is basically the set of rules that countries use when a fishing boat comes to their port to ask questions. And the U.S. has been a leader in establishing a regime nationally to do that, but also insisting that internationally people ask the right questions. And we have pushed forward a new proposal for a global law on this. And with the EU, we're trying to get other countries to ask the same questions that we want to ask our own vessels as they approach our shore, because unless we get other people to do that, there's no way we're going to stop the flow of illegal product into our own country. The third thing is traceability, and this is a key concept. Even if you have the vessels registered, and even if you have the right questions being asked when you land a boat at a fishing port, you still can get away with murder if, after the stuff leaves the boat, it can come to market any old which way. And so right now, it's very, very difficult in most cases to know with any kind of security where your fish came from. Tuna canners have a private system. They can tell you where their tuna came from because they're worried about health issues. And in some areas of the fishing industry, they have private systems for traceability that are good. But by and large, if you ask the question, where did my fish come from, not only does the person who is selling it to you not know the answer, but the person before that, and the person before that, and the person before that may not know the answer. We cannot stop IUU fishing unless we solve this problem, which is, and traceability is also highly relevant to people who are trying to sell fish to environmentally conscious consumers. So there are two things going on here. One is worrying about legality, and the other is that places like Whole Foods and other sort of high-end marketers are increasingly worried about selling to people who want to know, is my fish from a sustainable source? So you have certification regimes, you have local governments, you have private governments, even national governments going out and establishing right now new regimes to try to make fish more traceable. But there is no consistency among these, and there is no set of standards for saying how it should be done. And so at this point, we have a completely unregulated system for traceability, and internationally that's going to get to be a headache pretty fast for businesses, because if you need to have 3 or 5 or 6 different traceability systems in each of the markets you're working in, it's going to become unmanageable. So at some point there's actually going to be a business need for governments to get together and help say what is adequate traceability and what isn't. Okay, to recap, there are basically 2 areas we need to work on together. One is to strengthen U.S. leadership here at home. Right now, there are still major gaps in our own legal system just for saying what is illegal and what isn't illegal when we talk about what IUU fish is. Seafood is not it's not mandatory that seafood be traceable in any way. And enforcement efforts are way, way below what it's really going to take to get IUU fish off of our shelves. Internationally, we need to keep pushing because, as I said, a lot of this problem is offshore. We need to make sure that other countries sign up to the Port State Measures Agreement, and we need to push hard for that. We need to make sure that there is a global record of fishing vessels, and we need the big market countries like the US and the EU to cooperate on how they're closing their borders to IUU fish, because if they do it in totally different ways, the result is going to be a nightmare for business, and it will be an ineffective solution. So I think that's pretty much it. We want to live in a world where when you're buying fish from nice-looking young fish people, you can trust them. She's saying, surely I can trust this nice young man. I'm not sure what her husband's thinking about this. And he's saying, I sure hope I can trust the guy who sold me this fish. And I think this is where we are today, which is that consumers today are trusting, but the people who are selling the fish know that if you start looking under the lid, we've got some problems we've got to solve. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you so much, David. Now I'm going to ask Mark Gleason, who's the Executive Director of the Alaska Bering Sea Crabbers, to come and give a viewpoint of crabbers and fishermen in all of this, which I think is very important. So Mark.
Let's see.
Seems like the right arrow button was the most reliable one.
The right arrow button? All right. All right. Well, first of all, I want to thank everyone for coming today. This is an issue that my industry, it's been very important to us for years, and the fact that there are so many congressional staffers and other folks here today, it's just great to see. And I want to thank the foundation for putting on the briefing and WWF for agreeing to share the stage. So I'm Mark Gleason. I'm the Executive Director of the Alaska Bering Sea Crabbers. So this is just a brief overview of my talk. I'm going to tell you a little bit about who we are as an organization. I'll tell you some about the Bering Sea crab fishery. I'll talk a little bit about the domestic supply chain and how our products work their way through the supply chain. Then I'll go to the other side of the Bering Sea and talk about the Russian crab fishery and how illegal Russian crab enters the supply chain there. And then talk a little bit about the market impacts from that product. And then move to the section of kind of what can we do about it. So we'll look at some of the domestic legislation that David referred to. Some of the government-to-government actions that are in the course of happening now and other things that could happen. And then we'll move to the private sector, looking at certification programs and then the NGO involvement in the issue. And then finally, we'll talk about some of the traceability efforts that are underway right now within the industry itself. And I'll have a lot of cool crab boat pictures in here. But anyway, the Alaska Bering Sea Crabbers, we're a trade association based in Seattle. We represent about 70% of the Bering Sea crab harvest fleet. Our members are primarily from Alaska, Washington, and Oregon, but we also have a bunch of folks from California, from Arizona, spread out throughout the country. And our primary role is we're advocates for our members. We advocate in the North Pacific Fisheries Management Council, in the state of Alaska, both in the legislature and the Board of Fish, and then here in D.C., whether it be in Congress or with executive agency offices. And so, you know, I'm also going to make a little plug for the fishery. I've been a fisherman, or I was a fisherman for many years. I participated in a lot of different fisheries, and I'm really proud to be associated with this particular fishery. And so I'm gonna tout its benefits a little bit. In terms of the gear that we use, this is extremely good gear in its ability to catch crab, but it's also got a number of different conservation features that I want to highlight. We have escape mechanisms in the pots that allow juveniles and undersized crab to escape. We have biodegradable twine that holds this door in place, and so in the event that the pot is lost, in time the twine will degrade, the door will pop off, and it'll prevent the pot from continuing to ghost fish. We have the large mesh size here in the body web, and that also allows juveniles and undersized crab to escape. And then the line that we use, it's sinking line at the surface. And so what that does is it minimizes the potential for entanglements with marine mammals or ships. And this has been a huge problem on the East Coast with the lobster fishery and right whale entanglements. So I'm particularly proud of that. And we use just single pots, as opposed to also the lobster fishery uses, they put multiple pots on a single ground line. In terms of the fishery itself, our major species are king crab and opilio or snow crab. The management is a cooperative agreement between the Alaska Department of Fish and Game and the North Pacific Fisheries Management Council, and then the National Marine Fisheries Service implements the regulations after they've been approved by the Secretary of Commerce. In 2005, we changed the fishery. Prior to 2005, it was an open access. Well, it wasn't open access, but it was kind of a derby-style Olympic fishery where they would set an overall quota, and they would say, okay, season's open, go out, catch as much as you can, and when we hit the quota, we're going to close the season. And that caused people to take insane risks. It was many years the quota was exceeded because the boats just were out there too quickly, and management wasn't able to respond in terms of closing it quickly, and it was an economically underperforming fishery. And so we changed all that in 2005. We went to a quota-based management program. They call it the 3-Pi Cooperative. And so we have quota that's issued to the harvesters. We have a corresponding processor quota, and then we have a number of different mechanisms in place to protect crab-dependent communities. And then we also have an arbitration system in the event of price disputes with the processors. And so this is kind of the area that we work, and it's probably hard to see this slide, but this is the Bristol Bay Red King Crab fishery area, which is the big, it's the really famous one. And then the Opelio fishery is kind of all through here, and then these are lesser, smaller fisheries, but I couldn't find a really good map. But anyway, I'm very proud of the management here, and I wish Stephanie Moreland was here. She could talk a little bit more about that. And then so in terms of the supply chain, we catch the crab on the vessels. We deliver to shore-based processing facilities throughout Alaska and also to floating processors. Dutch Harbor, Akutan are the big, the well-known ports, St. Paul in the central Bering Sea, and then Kodiak in the Gulf of Alaska and King Cove in the Aleutian chain. In terms of verifying the catch, we have fish tickets that are issued by Fish and Game, and we can document the poundage and the landings. And then we have VMS, which is vessel monitoring systems. We have those on the boats, and we have federal observers. Not 100% coverage, but pretty close to, well, not 100% coverage, but definitely representative coverage. And so, we can verify from the harvester perspective, the poundage, the species, and where it was caught. And so once we get to the processing facilities, we come to shore-based facilities, they drop a basket down into the hold, processing workers jump into the hold, they manually put all the crab in the basket, and at this point we kind of turn over the chain of custody and it goes to the processors. So the product is then brought into the processing facility, they cook it whole, it's packaged into different product forms, frozen, boxed, and shipped out. Most of the processors, well, all the processors have internal mechanisms to track the product through its, portion or their portion of the supply chain. And like I say, this is the point that I want to stress. The traceability here is excellent. From the point of harvest to the point of export, we know exactly where that crab has been at every step of the way. From there, some of the crab is exported directly to Asia as finished product, Japan being the biggest market for our crab. But we're also trying to expand our markets in China. Some of it is sent to Asia for repacking, to kind of put it in custom packaging for specific customer orders. And then the other part of the crab stays in the domestic supply chain. Some of it goes to repacking plants, some to food service outlets, restaurants, and then a little bit gets to retail. But the repacking plants and this part of the supply chain is where the traceability potentially could break down. So moving across the Bering Sea to the Russian side, they have similar vessels, similar gear. For the most part, they go after the same species that we fish. They have two distinct areas: the Barents Sea, which is the northern sea, I guess. They share it with Norway, and they're actually fishing on an introduced crab species there. They introduced red crab there, I guess maybe in the 60s or 70s, and it took off. The population has exploded, and so now it supports a pretty healthy commercial fishery. But what we're really concerned with is the Russian Far East. In Russia, they also have a quota-based management program. They auction the quotas in 10-year increments to Russian citizens. And there are also some foreign access agreements. I think that the only one is with Japan, but I'm not certain of that. And then management is through the Federal Fisheries Agency. So this, like I said, this is the Aleutian chain in Alaska, and this is the Kamchatka Peninsula, and this is primarily where the fishing occurs. And as you can see, it's a huge area. Cops on the water, there aren't enough cops on the water to effectively patrol that entire area. And the criminals know that. So in terms of, the illegal product entering the supply chain, there's kind of two distinct I don't know what fisheries. There's the gray fishery, which is, it's primarily companies that have a legal allocation or have legal quota exceeding that quota. And that illegal product enters the supply chain along with illegal crab. It's mislabeled to obscure the origin, and then Fake documentation will kind of legitimize that product and then make it seem as if it was legal. And then there's the black fishery, which is the traditional definition of IUU. I mean, it's harvest by vessels with no quota or no license. Oftentimes these vessels fly flags of convenience, Cambodia being one of the major flags of convenience, also Sierra Leone, Panama, and Honduras. That product is transshipped at sea, and then it's delivered to Japan and Korea for processing and then integration into the supply chain. And once again, oftentimes it's mislabeled to obscure the origin, and then there's fake documentation used to integrate it into the legal supply. And so this, let's see, let me go back. So this is a Cambodian flagged vessel that had a primarily Russian crew, and it's about to be seized. And then this was a Russian vessel that was detained in Vladivostok and suspected of being engaged in IUU. And I don't really know what happened to either one of those, but I wanted to differentiate those from the U.S. vessels, which are the other ones I've shown. And in terms of market impacts, it's really hard to pin down. I mean, because this is an illegal activity, and it's hard to really pin down with completely verifiable numbers. But the best estimates that we have are that between 2000 and 2010, for every legal crab taken in Russian waters, there were 2.6 crabs taken illegally. And I have some numbers here that look at the volume or the estimated IUU production coming out of Russia from 2007 to 2010. And you may see that, I mean, there's decreasing amounts of illegal product coming out, and there's also decreasing amounts of legal product. And you may look at this and think, great, we're fixing the problem. But that's not the case. In 2010, we had 89 million pounds estimated for the illegal product. You compare that to the 90 million pounds of legal Russian product, and so, as David said, I mean, half the product is illegal. And then you compare that to the 69 million pounds that we produce domestically, and I mean, for us we don't have a problem competing with this legal product, but it's competing against pirates is, I mean, we're at a competitive disadvantage without a question. And so, our estimates show that $560 million has been lost in revenue to American fishermen because of this Russian issue. And then from the municipal standpoint, $11 million in lost tax revenue for Alaskan communities. That's pretty significant. But I think the most interesting part here is that the Russian government, for the most part, was turning a blind eye to this for quite some time. But their latest estimates are that they're losing, or that the illegal crab trade is worth $800 million a year, and from a tax standpoint, they're losing about $200 million a year to the Russian Treasury, and that has definitely opened their eyes to the situation, and they've taken a number of steps to hopefully rectify it. And then government to government, there are the FAO, the UN efforts. There's the EU-US MOU that was signed last September. There's an agreement that's pending right now between the United States and the Russians, and I'm hoping that we get that signed this summer. And then the Russians on their end have initiated discussions with the South Koreans, the North Koreans, the Canadians, the Japanese, the Chinese. The Chinese and the South Koreans are talking. And catch documentation certification that David referred to as well. That, if we can have a verifiable certification program, I mean, that would be great in terms of addressing this issue. And then there's the MCS network, which I think that's what? Monitoring, control and surveillance, thank you. And that's an international effort to kind of increase enforcement capacity. And then we have joint enforcement protocols that can be country to country. And so there's a big component of this information sharing in that agreement. So, these are some of the things that governments can do. And then moving into the private sector, we have the various certification programs that are in place, and they have a traceability component to them. Most recently, Global Trust and the Alaska Seafood Marketing Institute have partnered. They're doing a certification program that really looks more at sustainability and management, but through the auditing process, there is a certain amount of traceability that can be pulled out of there. And then the NGOs are very engaged. WWF and Traffic, the Marine Fish Conservation Network, Pew has developed, put significant resources behind this effort. And something that I just became aware of recently is the Sustainable Fisheries Partnership and the Fisheries Improvement programs that they work on around the world. And I don't know a whole lot about them, but I think there's great promise there. And then from the industry standpoint, the Alaska Seafood Marketing Institute has a standard for traceability of Alaskan seafood. NFI has a traceability implementation guide. Trace Register, it's a company, I think they're based in Seattle, but they provide supply chain verification and tools to help track your supply chain. And then another thing that I just found out recently, Handy International. They're a company based on the eastern shore of Maryland. They're primarily known for their crab cakes, but they've just instituted a traceability program really geared towards the consumer, so the consumer can trace the origins of their fish. And, you know, at the end of the day, that's really going to be a big driver in this. If the consumer demands it, I mean, you look at the case with Dolphin Safe Tuna. When the consumer demanded that a change was made there, I mean, those cans of tuna got off the shelves immediately. So I'm really hoping that the consumers, you know, do move forward and demand that they're eating legal product. And just to wrap it up, you know, from my perspective, you know, the window of opportunity is open. The crab industry in the Bering Sea, for years they've been talking about what a problem this was. And we were really the lone voice in the wilderness. But, you know, Congress is engaged now, the administration is engaged, the conservation community is engaged, and most importantly, the Russians are engaged. And, you know, if the problem begins in their waters, then, you know, the solution has to begin there as well. So with that, I'll open it up to questions. Here's my email and the website for my organization. And we just launched our new website, and we'll be filling it out with a little more content throughout the summer. So visit now and visit again and again. And thank you very much.
We've gone a little bit over, and so we're going to have to allow everybody who would like to leave or needs to leave for a variety of reasons, like they have meetings that began a couple minutes ago. Please do so, and then we'll do just informal questions afterwards. So thanks so much for coming, and I know our presenters will stay here afterwards for some time to answer questions. Bye-bye. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate that.